Hi guys, this side is Dr. Vani Chatterjee and again I'm back with you. Today's topic, what I'm going to share with you is regarding the injuries in the shoulder and especially the overhead kind of activities happening in the sport. There have been a lot of athletes approaching to me in the past regarding the pain in throwing or any kind of overhead movements. So I thought I should share and I should make a video regarding this topic. Now coming to the biomechanics and muscle activations we'll be talking about today. So coming directly to the topic, we'll be talking about only the one phase which is really responsible and where the injuries are quite common and very 95%, 90% the injuries happen in that phase of the throwing mechanics out of the various phases of throwing. Throwing is a very vital important component of any kind of sport. It's the most fastest human motion happening in the sport with a humeral internal rotation velocity of 7,000 to 7,500 degrees per second. So let's start the topic, and today we'll be talking about the arm deceleration phase and the muscle activation happening in those phases responsible for shoulder injuries. Come. Alright, so the arm deceleration phase is one of the phases of overhead throwing mechanics. It basically starts with the ball release and ends up with the maximum shoulder internal rotation. So typically the concern about this mechanism is to avoid the acceleration or to avoid the excessive transmission of shoulder while performing a movement, while performing a ball release movement. Out of the various researches published in the past in the journals, one among them is Escamilla et al., which says 50% or more than 50%, the greater amount of compressive forces of a particular individual is working in order to avoid anterior translation of the shoulder in this phase, followed by posterior shear force of 40 to 50% of a particular individual body weight is happening or is occurring over this joint in order to avoid anterior subluxation. There have been a lot of researches done, as what I've said. Among them also says 400 newtons of posterior shear force, 300 newtons of inferior shear force, 1090 newtons of compressive force or compressive loading, and a horizontal adduction torque of 97 newtons per meter is happening or is occurring during this phase of throwing mechanics. This is a very common phase. It depends. It can subject to the changes can be happen in terms of amount of loading happening in the joints, depends on the type of sport you play as well as the energy and the strength ratio. Another thing about this phase is highly responsible for arm internal rotation as well as elbow extension. So the muscle activation patterns happening in this phase or which could be responsible for any kind of injury could be either the infraspinatus, the teres minor. In fact, the teres minor is the one which is at the peak velocity at this phase in order to resist arm internal rotation as well as anterior translation. The trapezius, the serratus anterior and the rhomboids are at the maximum voluntary isometric contracted phase in order to avoid or in order to resist arm acceleration in front, eccentrically working over it in fact. Followed by, along with infraspinatus and teres minor, it's the supraspinatus and the deltoid working together again in maximum voluntary isometric contractions to avoid arm internal rotation. Now, due to a lot of loading is happening, the greater amount of load is happening over this shoulder joint during this phase, it could be susceptible to overload injuries always. So the injuries which could be responsible in this phase or which could happen in this phase are either the labrum injuries or the biceps pathologies, the under cuff injuries, could be tears, the rotator cuff injuries, either the capsular injuries or the internal impingements. So this is the phase which is highly responsible for any sport you play, whether it's in badminton or a javelin throw or a fast bowling. This is the phase where the injury ratio is quite high as compared to other phases of fast bowling. So any athlete who will perform this phase very efficiently can avoid any form of injury happening to the overhead shoulder. So hope this video proves vital for you in your self-learning, and we'll be back with our second video in the second phase of this. Thank you so much.